Rage. Pure, burning rage coursed through June Callahan's veins as she threw the last of her belongings into her battered Honda Civic. The engagement ring, 2 years of savings for what turned out to be a lie, sat heavy in her coat pocket like a stone she couldn't bring herself to throw away yet. "I can explain," Michael had said, his words echoing in her mind like broken glass. "But how do you explain being found in bed with your fiancé's best friend? How do you explain 5 years of I love you turning into it just happened?" The October air in Burlington bit at her cheeks as she slammed the trunk shut. Her hands shook, not from cold, but from the kind of betrayal that hollows you out from the inside. The library felt suffocating now, full of whispered pity from colleagues who'd known before she did. Even her beloved books, her refuge since childhood, couldn't quiet the storm in her chest. Pine Ridge Retreat. The confirmation email glowed on her phone screen like a beacon of hope. 3 days alone in the mountains. 3 days to figure out how to breathe again without feeling like she was drowning. The drive up Route 108 usually calmed her, winding roads through forests that exploded in amber and crimson this time of year. But today, the beauty felt like mockery. How dare the world be gorgeous when hers was crumbling? Her phone buzzed. Another text from Michael. "Please, June. Let me explain." She turned it off. The GPS led her down a narrow dirt road toward what looked like a postcard cabin. All cedar logs and wraparound porches, nestled between towering maples. Her breath caught. It was perfect, exactly what her shattered soul needed. But as she pulled into the gravel driveway, her heart sank. Another car sat there already, a sleek black Aston Martin that cost more than her annual salary. The vanity plate read, Empire 1. "No, no, no," she whispered, checking her confirmation email again. "Cabin 7, Pine Ridge Retreat." This was definitely Cabin 7. Before she could decide whether to cry or scream, the cabin door opened. A man stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a perfectly tailored coat that probably cost more than her rent. Dark hair, steel gray eyes, and the kind of sharp jawline that belonged in magazines, not on her mountain retreat. He looked at her car with the expression of someone who'd just stepped in something unpleasant. "There's been a mistake," he called out, his voice carrying the crisp authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "This cabin is reserved." June felt something snap inside her chest. Not her heart this time, but something fiercer. Something that had been pushed down and polite for too long. She climbed out of her car, all 5'6" of her bristling with barely contained fury. "No mistake here, buddy. I have a reservation, and I've driven 3 hours to get away from men who think they can just—" Her voice cracked. The weight of the day, of Michael's betrayal, of the pitying looks, of feeling like she was somehow not enough, crashed over her like a cold wave. The stranger's expression shifted, his arrogance flickering into something that might have been concern. Are you all right? Do I look all right to you?" The words tumbled out before she could stop them. "My fiancé is sleeping with my best friend. I just lost my deposit on a wedding venue, and now some rich guy in an overpriced car is trying to steal my one chance at peace. So no, I am decidedly not all right." For a moment they stared at each other across the small space between their worlds, his of obvious wealth and power, hers of heartbreak and secondhand everything. October wind rustled the leaves above them, sending a cascade of gold floating down like confetti for a celebration no one was having. Sterling Vaughn had faced hostile takeovers, board rebellions, and Madison's particular brand of elegant cruelty. But something about this red-haired woman with fire in her green eyes and pain written across her freckled face made his chest tighten in a way that had nothing to do with his failing heart. "I'm Sterling," he said quietly, and for the first time in years, he didn't add his last name like a weapon. Something twisted in Sterling's chest as he watched June's shoulders shake. It wasn't his heart condition. He knew that familiar squeeze. This was different, unfamiliar, like watching someone drown when you'd forgotten how to swim yourself. "Look," he said, pulling out his phone. "Let me call my assistant. She can find you another place, somewhere better. I'll cover the cost." June's head snapped up, tears still glistening on her cheeks, but her eyes blazed with renewed fury. Oh, how noble. The rich guy throws money at the problem and makes it disappear. I'm trying to help. You're trying to buy me off. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of dirt across her cheek that somehow made her look more beautiful, not less. "Let me guess. You're used to people just rolling over when you flash your wallet?" Sterling felt his own temper flare. He was dying, for Christ's sake. He had 18 months to figure out what mattered. And right now, what mattered was getting this infuriating woman out of his space so he could fall apart in peace. Actually, yes, he said coldly. Most people are reasonable enough to accept a generous offer when they hear one. June laughed, but it was sharp enough to cut glass. Reasonable? You want reasonable? Here's reasonable. I paid for this cabin fair and square. I drove 3 hours through mountain roads after the worst day of my life, and I'm not moving because some corporate shark in a fancy coat thinks he owns the world. Corporate shark? Sterling's eyebrows shot up. You don't even know who I am. I know enough. Designer everything, ego the size of Vermont, probably made your money crushing small businesses. She crossed her arms, chin lifted in defiance. Am I warm? Sterling stared at her. When was the last time someone had spoken to him like this? When was the last time someone had looked at him and seen just a man? Not his net worth, not his empire, not his reputation. Just him. It was intoxicating and infuriating, and somehow exactly what his dying heart needed. You know what? He said, surprising himself. Keep the cabin. June blinked. What? You win. I'll find somewhere else. He started toward his car, then stopped. The medications in his cup holder caught the afternoon light. 18 months. Maybe 16 now, with the stress Madison's latest schemes were causing. An idea struck him. Reckless, stupid, but suddenly irresistible. Actually, let's make this interesting, he said, turning back to face her. June's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? A bet. 30 days. 30 days for what? Sterling's heart hammered against his ribs, and for once it wasn't the arrhythmia. I bet I can make you fall in love with me in 30 days. Without telling you my last name, without using my money, without any of the things you think I rely on. June's mouth fell open. Are you insane? Probably. He stepped closer, close enough to catch the scent of her shampoo, something simple and clean that made his chest ache. If I win, you work for me. Consulting job, good pay, travel the country. And if you lose? Sterling smiled, and it was the first genuine smile he'd felt in months. If I lose, I donate $50 million to libraries across Vermont. The silence stretched between them like a live wire. June's green eyes searched his face, looking for the trick, the catch, the lie. Sterling held his breath, waiting. You're completely crazy, she whispered. Is that a yes? June thought about Michael, about the pitying looks, about playing it safe her whole life and where it had gotten her. She thought about this arrogant stranger, who somehow made her feel more alive in 5 minutes than she had in months. 30 days, she said finally. But we share the cabin, and if you think you can just charm your way into my bed, you're going to be very disappointed. Sterling's smile widened. Wouldn't dream of it. But as June turned to grab her bags, Sterling pressed a hand to his chest where his heart struggled to keep its rhythm. 30 days to make her love him. He hadn't told her the real stakes, that in 30 days, he might not have enough time left to matter. As October wind scattered leaves around them like fallen stars, neither of them realized they just made the most important bet of their lives. The cabin had 2 bedrooms, thank God. June claimed the smaller one overlooking the forest, leaving Sterling with the master suite. She unpacked methodically, trying to ignore the way he moved through the space like he owned it, which, for all she knew, he probably did. So, she called from her doorway, watching him examine the stone fireplace with the intensity of someone appraising real estate. What's your story? Besides being obscenely wealthy and apparently having nothing better to do than harass heartbroken librarians. Sterling glanced up, caught off guard by the directness. Most people danced around questions about his wealth, either fawning or pretending not to care. June just laid it out like she was asking about the weather. I'm in hospitality, he said carefully. Hotels. Ah, June nodded sagely. That explains the superiority complex. You're used to people treating you like royalty because you provide overpriced rooms and tiny soaps. Sterling felt his mouth twitch, almost a smile. The soaps aren't that tiny. Spoken like a true hotelier. June disappeared back into her room, and Sterling heard drawers opening and closing. What's your first move, by the way? In this ridiculous bet of yours. Sterling hadn't thought that far ahead. The bet had been pure impulse, born from the way she'd looked at him like he was just a man instead of a means to an end. Now, faced with the reality of wooing someone who clearly despised everything he represented, he felt oddly at sea. I'm going to make dinner, he said finally. Silence from her room. Then, you cook? Sterling paused. Did he cook? His penthouse had a kitchen that would make professional chefs weep. but it was mostly for show. He had 3 restaurants on speed dial and a housekeeper who left prepared meals in his fridge, but how hard could it be? Of course I cook, he lied smoothly. 20 minutes later, the cabin's smoke alarm was shrieking and Sterling stood in a haze of burned olive oil and what might have once been vegetables, staring at a pan that looked like a crime scene. June appeared in the kitchen doorway wearing an oversized sweater and jeans that made her look impossibly young. She took in the chaos, the scattered ingredients, the smoking pan, Sterling's expression of complete bewilderment, and burst out laughing. It wasn't a polite laugh or a mocking one. It was pure, delighted joy, the kind that crinkled her eyes and made her snort slightly. The sound hit Sterling like a physical blow to his chest. "Oh my God," she gasped, waving smoke away from her face. "You've never cooked a day in your life, have you?" Sterling felt heat creep up his neck that had nothing to do with the kitchen disaster. "I may have overstated my culinary abilities." "May have?" June moved past him to turn off the burner, her arm brushing his. Even through his shirt he felt the warmth of the contact. "This poor pan looks like it survived a war. I was trying to impress you," he admitted, and the honesty surprised them both. June turned to look at him, really look at him. For a moment the armor of wealth and arrogance slipped and she saw something vulnerable underneath, something almost boyish. "Well," she said softly, "you succeeded, just not how you expected." Their eyes met across the ruined kitchen, and Sterling felt something shift between them, a tiny crack in the wall she'd built around herself. For a heartbeat, he forgot about the medications hidden in his luggage, forgot about Madison's threats, forgot about the countdown clock ticking in his chest. "Let me," June said, moving toward the refrigerator. "I may not have much else going for me right now, but I can cook." "You have plenty going for you," Sterling said quietly, watching her pull ingredients from the fridge with efficient movements. "Your ex was an idiot." June's hands stilled on a package of pasta. She didn't turn around, but he saw her shoulders tense. "You don't know anything about my ex." "I know he let you go." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Neither of them was ready to examine. June finally turned, her green eyes searching his face for the angle, the manipulation, the inevitable disappointment. All she found was sincerity, and it terrified her more than his arrogance ever could. "Day 1, she said, her voice carefully neutral. "And you're already pulling out the big guns." Sterling smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. "June, I haven't even started fighting yet." Outside, the October sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Inside the cabin, 2 damaged souls circled each other like wary animals, neither realizing they were already falling. The storm hit at 2 a.m., rattling the cabin windows like angry fists. June jerked awake to thunder that seemed to shake the mountains themselves, her heart hammering for more than just the sudden noise. Lightning illuminated her small room in stark, terrifying flashes. She'd always hated storms. They reminded her of being 8 years old, huddled in her grandmother's root cellar while tornadoes tore through the Midwest. The rational part of her brain knew she was safe in the solid cabin, but fear didn't listen to reason. Another crack of thunder, closer this time, and the lights flickered, then died completely. "Perfect," she whispered into the darkness, pulling her blanket tighter around her shoulders. The October night had turned cold, and without electricity, the cabin's warmth was already beginning to seep away. A soft knock at her door made her freeze. "June?" Sterling's voice, careful and concerned. "You okay in there?" She almost said yes, almost maintained the pretense that she was fine, that she didn't need anything from anyone. But another flash of lightning lit up her window like a camera bulb, and she couldn't stop the small gasp that escaped her lips. "June, she started, then stopped. The truth sat heavy on her tongue. "I don't like storms." Silence. Then the sound of her door opening slowly. Sterling stood silhouetted in the doorway, wearing only a t-shirt and pajama pants, his hair mussed from sleep. In his hands was a battery-powered lantern that cast a warm golden glow. "Mind if I come in?" She should say no. She should maintain boundaries, keep her distance, remember that this was just a bet to him. But when the next thunderclap shook the cabin, she found herself nodding. Sterling set the lantern on her nightstand and, after a moment's hesitation, sat on the edge of her bed, not too close, but close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "When I was a kid," he said quietly, "I was terrified of the dark, not storms, just darkness. My father used to lock me in the wine cellar when I disappointed him, said it would make me stronger." June turned to look at him, seeing his profile in the lantern's soft light. There was something raw in his voice, something that made her chest ache. Did it? Make you stronger? Sterling was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. It made me afraid to be vulnerable. Took me 38 years to figure out that's not the same thing. Another flash of lightning, but June barely noticed. She was too focused on the man beside her, on the way his hands trembled slightly in his lap, on the realization that Sterling Vaughn, whoever he really was, carried his own darkness. What disappoints a father enough to lock his kid in a cellar? She asked softly. Crying at my mother's funeral. The words came out flat, matter of fact, but June heard the echo of a 12-year-old boy's pain underneath. He said grieving was weakness. That Vaughn men didn't... Sterling stopped abruptly as if realizing he'd said too much. Vaughn, June repeated slowly. That's your last name? Panic flashed across Sterling's features. I shouldn't have... Look, it doesn't matter. Sterling Vaughn. June sat up straighter, the name tickling something in her memory. Why does that sound familiar? June, please. But she was already reaching for her phone, muscle memory from years of research librarian work taking over. Even without cell service, she had saved articles, offline databases. Her fingers flew across the screen while Sterling watched in growing horror. Oh my God. The words came out as a breathless whisper. Sterling Vaughn. Vaughn Hospitality. You're not just in hotels. You own half the luxury resorts on the East Coast. Sterling felt his carefully constructed world tilting. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. He was supposed to have 30 days to make her see him as just a man, not a walking bank account. June, let me explain. You're worth... She was still scrolling, her face pale in the phone's blue light. Forbes estimates over $200 million. The number hung between them like a physical barrier. Sterling watched as June's expression shifted from shock to understanding, to something that looked dangerously like betrayal. The bet, she said slowly. This whole thing. You're not trying to win my heart. You're trying to buy it. Just like everyone else. No. Sterling reached for her hand, but she pulled away. June, that's not... Get out. Please, just listen. Get out. Her voice cracked on the words, and Sterling saw tears gathering in her eyes. 30 days of letting some billionaire prove that poor little June from Vermont can be bought like everything else? I don't think so. Sterling stood slowly, the lantern casting dancing shadows on the walls. At the door, he turned back, his heart beating in irregular rhythm against his ribs. For what it's worth, he said quietly, I forgot about the money the moment I met you. The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving June alone with the storm and the devastating realization that she'd been more right about him than she'd ever wanted to be. In his own room, Sterling sat on the edge of his bed and pulled out a pill bottle with shaking hands. As thunder rolled across the mountains, he wondered if heartbreak could actually kill you faster than a failing heart. June didn't speak to him for 3 days. Sterling tried everything. Coffee left outside her door, ignored. Wildflowers from the mountain trails, wilted untouched on the porch. Even a handwritten apology slipped under her door, returned with lies scrawled across it in red ink. By the 4th morning, he was desperate enough to break his own rules. The florist in Burlington probably thought he was insane, ordering 5 dozen white roses to be delivered to a cabin in the middle of nowhere. But Sterling had learned that desperation made you do stupid things, like fall in love with a woman who saw right through your bullshit. June was reading on the porch swing when the delivery truck arrived. Sterling watched from the kitchen window as her face cycled through confusion, recognition, and finally disgust as she realized what was happening. She met the delivery man halfway down the path. Take them back, Sterling heard her say firmly. I didn't order these. Ma'am, they're paid for. Card says they're from a Sterling. I don't care if they're from the Pope. Take them back. Sterling stepped onto the porch, his heart doing that irregular flutter that had become more frequent since meeting her. June, please. She whirled around, her green eyes blazing. Roses? Really? This is exactly what I'm talking about. You can't just throw money at this and make it disappear. I'm not trying to... What's next, a jewelry store, a car? Maybe you'll just buy the whole mountain and rename it Mount June? The delivery man cleared his throat awkwardly. So, should I take these back or... Yes, June said firmly. At the same time, Sterling said, no. In the uncomfortable silence that followed, Sterling felt something crack inside his chest. Not his heart, though that was struggling too, but something deeper. The last of his pride, maybe. You're right, he said quietly. causing both June and the delivery man to stare at him. Take them back. All of them. June blinked, clearly not expecting surrender. But, Sterling continued, pulling his wallet from his pocket, give them to someone who'll appreciate them. The nurses at Burlington General, maybe. Or the elementary school. Kids love flowers. He handed the confused delivery man a $100 tip and an address, then turned back to June. You want to know who I really am? Not the money, not the empire, not the headlines, just me. Without waiting for an answer, he disappeared into the cabin. June stood frozen on the path, watching the delivery truck disappear around the bend, a strange ache building in her chest. An hour later, she found the letter. It was tucked under the windshield wiper of her Honda, written on plain notebook paper, in Sterling's distinctive handwriting. June, you're right about the flowers, about the money, about all of it. I've been trying to win you the same way I've won everything else in my life, by outspending the competition. But here's what I should have told you from the beginning. I'm dying. June's hands trembled as she read on. Cardiomyopathy, the same thing that killed my wife 3 years ago. The doctors give me 18 months, maybe less. I came to Vermont to hide from the world, to fall apart in private. I never expected to meet someone who made me want to live again. The bet wasn't about conquest. It was about discovering if I was capable of earning something that mattered, if I could be worthy of love instead of just buying a sophisticated version of loneliness. I understand why you hate me. I understand why you can't trust anything I say now. But I need you to know that every moment with you, every laugh, every argument, every second you looked at me like I was just a man instead of a net worth, those were the most real moments of my life. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not asking for another chance. I'm just asking you to believe that somewhere between your fury at my kitchen fire and your terror during that storm, I fell in love with you. Not because of what I could buy you, but because of who you are when no one's trying to impress you. The bet is off. Keep the cabin as long as you want. I'll find somewhere else to wait out whatever time I have left. If you want to know the man behind the money, there's a box under the loose floorboard by the fireplace. Everything real about me is in there. Sterling P.S. Your ex was more than an idiot. He was blind. June read the letter 3 times before her vision blurred with tears. Her hands shook as she folded the paper and walked back toward the cabin, her heart hammering against her ribs. The floorboard creaked when she pried it up. Inside was a small wooden box, and inside that, letters. Dozens of them, all addressed to Emma, my love, all written in Sterling's careful script, all dated after his wife's death. June sank onto the couch and read the first one with trembling fingers. It was raw, devastating. A husband's guilt and grief poured onto paper. A man blaming himself for working too much, for fighting the night she died, for surviving when she didn't. The last letter was dated just a week ago. Emma, I met someone today. I know you'd want me to be happy, but I don't know how to love someone when I'm dying too. I don't know how to let someone love me when I might not be here to love them back. Help me figure out how to be brave enough to try. June pressed the letter to her chest and cried. For Sterling's loss, for his fear, for the walls they'd both built to protect hearts that were already broken. Outside, storm clouds were gathering again over the Green Mountains. But this time, June wasn't afraid of the thunder. June found him by the lake just after sunset, sitting on a fallen log with his knees drawn up like a lost child. His expensive coat lay forgotten beside him, and his white dress shirt was rolled up at the sleeves despite the October chill. He looked smaller somehow, diminished, as if the weight of his secrets had been holding him upright. He didn't turn when her footsteps crunched through the fallen leaves, but his shoulders tensed. You read them, he said quietly. It wasn't a question. June sat beside him on the log, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body, far enough to still escape if she needed to. All of them. The lake stretched before them like a mirror, reflecting the last gold and crimson streaks of daylight. Somewhere across the water, a loon called, a sound so lonely it made June's chest ache. Emma would have liked you, Sterling said suddenly. You both had this way of cutting through bullshit with surgical precision. She used to say I collected people the way other men collected watches, impressive from a distance, but ultimately just for show. Was she right? Sterling's laugh was bitter, devastatingly, until you. June pulled her knees up to match his posture, wrapping her arms around her shins. Why didn't you tell me? About being sick, I mean. Because I wanted you to love me, not save me. His voice cracked on the words. Because I'm tired of being everyone's tragedy. The grieving widower, the dying millionaire. I just wanted to be a man trying to win a woman's heart. And the bet? Was any of that real? Sterling turned to look at her then, and June's breath caught at the raw pain in his gray eyes. The bet was the stupidest, most desperate thing I've ever done. But falling in love with you? That was the most real thing that's ever happened to me. The words hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they were brave enough to cross. June felt tears threatening again. Not the angry tears of betrayal, but something deeper and more frightening. You can't just say things like that, she whispered. Why not? Because I'm already broken. Because Michael destroyed my ability to trust. And now you're asking me to fall in love with someone who's going to leave me too. Sterling reached out slowly as if approaching a wounded animal and covered her hand with his. His skin was warm despite the cold air, and June felt her traitorous heart skip at the contact. I never asked you to fall in love with me, he said softly. I just asked for 30 days to try to earn it. And then what? Even if I did, even if what happens when the 30 days are over and you're still dying? The question settled between them like a stone in still water, creating ripples neither could control. Sterling was quiet for so long that June thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible above the lapping of the lake. I don't know. I've never gotten this far before. June laughed despite herself, a sound caught between tears and disbelief. You made a bet to make someone fall in love with you, and you didn't think about what came after. I didn't think there would be an after. I thought you'd see through me in a week and send me packing. I thought I'd spend 30 days being rejected by the most beautiful woman I'd ever met, and then I'd die knowing I'd at least tried to feel something real. Sterling. June's voice was soft, careful, like she was handling glass. What if there could be an after? What if the doctors are wrong? They're not wrong. He lifted their joined hands and pressed them against his chest, where June could feel the irregular flutter of his heartbeat. Feel that? That's not normal. That's not going to get better. June felt the erratic rhythm beneath her palm and wanted to cry for all the time they wouldn't have, all the mornings they'd never share, all the fights they'd never resolve. How long? She asked. Realistically? 12 months? Maybe 14 if I'm careful. And the transplant? There has to be. I'm not on the list. Sterling's voice was flat, final. Emma needed a transplant too. She was on the list for 18 months. 18 months of hope and disappointment and false alarms. She died waiting. That doesn't mean you will. It means I won't put myself through it. Or anyone else. June pulled her hand free and turned to face him fully, her green eyes fierce in the dying light. That's the most selfish thing I've ever heard. Sterling blinked, clearly not expecting an attack. Selfish? You're giving up. You're making the decision for both of us before we even know what us could be. June's voice was rising, powered by a fury that had nothing to do with his money and everything to do with his fatalism. You want to know what real love is? It's fighting. It's trying everything, even when the odds suck. It's not lying down and accepting death because you're too scared to hope. June, no. She stood abruptly, pacing to the water's edge. You want to spend whatever time you have left feeling sorry for yourself? Fine. But don't ask me to fall in love with a man who's already given up. Sterling stood too, something sparking in his chest that had nothing to do with his faulty wiring. You think I've given up? Haven't you? I flew across the country to chase a woman who hates me. I've spent a week trying to prove I'm worth loving despite being fundamentally broken. I've told you things I've never told another living soul. His voice was rough with emotion. If that's giving up, I'd hate to see what trying looks like. They faced each other across the small beach, the air between them crackling with tension and unspoken need. The sun had set completely now, leaving them in the soft blue of twilight. So what now? June asked finally. We have, 23 days left on your ridiculous bet? 23 days, Sterling confirmed. June took a deep breath, tasting autumn and possibility on the air. Then we'd better not waste them. She walked back to him slowly, deliberately, and Sterling felt his heart stutter for reasons that had nothing to do with his condition. When she reached up and touched his face, her palm cool against his cheek, he forgot how to breathe entirely. I'm terrified of you, she whispered. Good, he whispered back. I'm terrified of you too. And then they were kissing, soft and desperate, and completely inevitable, while the first stars appeared over the green mountains like promises neither of them was sure they could keep. For 6 perfect days they lived like the world had forgotten about them. Sterling taught June to make coffee that didn't taste like mud, while she showed him that scrambled eggs were better with cream cheese and chives. They hiked mountain trails until his heart couldn't take any more, then sat on granite outcroppings sharing stories and silence in equal measure. At night, they built fires and talked until dawn painted the sky rose gold above the peaks. June learned that Sterling collected vintage books he'd never had time to read, that he was afraid of flying but had never told anyone, and that he made small origami cranes when he was anxious, a habit Emma had taught him during her chemotherapy. Sterling discovered that June hummed when she was happy, that she dog-eared pages despite being a librarian, and that she cried at commercials but stayed stone-faced during horror movies. They were careful with each other, dancing around the growing tension that sparked every time their hands brushed or their eyes met across the dinner table. The knowledge of his condition hung between them like a question neither was ready to answer. How do you love someone when time is your enemy? On the 7th morning, June woke to the sound of a car engine in the driveway. Sterling was already in the kitchen, his face pale as he stared out the window. June followed his gaze and felt her stomach drop. A sleek silver Porsche sat beside her Honda like a predator stalking prey. The woman stepping out of it was everything June wasn't. Tall, platinum blonde, wearing a coat that probably cost more than June's annual salary. Even from a distance, she moved with the calculated grace of someone who knew exactly how devastating she was. Madison, Sterling said quietly, and June heard a lifetime of complications in that single word. Your ex? June asked, though she already knew the answer from the way Sterling's hands were shaking. Among other things. Sterling moved away from the window, running a hand through his hair. She's also my business partner, and Emma's former best friend, and currently trying to destroy my company. June felt pieces clicking into place. The scandal you were running from. Before Sterling could answer, the front door opened without a knock. Madison Blake swept into the cabin like she owned it, bringing with her the scent of expensive perfume and barely contained malice. Sterling, darling. Her voice was honey over broken glass. You've been so difficult to find. She paused when she noticed June, her ice-blue eyes taking in the simple sweater and jeans with barely concealed disdain. And you must be the local entertainment. June felt heat rise in her cheeks, but before she could respond, Sterling stepped between them, his body language shifting into something protective and dangerous. Madison, what do you want? To save you from making another catastrophic mistake. Madison's smile was sharp enough to cut, though I see I may be too late. She moved deeper into the cabin, her heels clicking against the hardwood floors like a countdown timer. June noticed how Sterling's breathing changed, becoming shallow and irregular. The board meeting is tomorrow, Sterling. They're voting on the Blake-Morrison merger. Without your vote, you'll lose controlling interest in your own company. Let them have it, Sterling said flatly. I'm done playing games. Madison laughed, a sound like crystal breaking. Oh, my sweet, stupid Sterling. You think this is about the company? This was never about the company. She pulled out her phone and swiped to a photo, then held it up for both of them to see. June's breath caught. It was a picture of her and Sterling kissing by the lake, taken with a telephoto lens. Dying billionaire's last desperate fling with small-town nobody, Madison read from what looked like a draft headline. I can have this on every gossip site within the hour, along with some very interesting details about your condition. June felt the blood drain from her face. You've been watching us? I've been protecting my investment. Madison's gaze shifted to Sterling, who had gone very still. Did you really think you could just disappear? That I'd let you throw away everything we built together for some pathetic attempt at playing house? You don't know anything about her, Sterling said quietly, but June could hear the warning in his voice. Don't I? Madison's smile turned predatory. June Callahan, 34, reference librarian at Burlington Public Library, recently dumped by her fiancé for cheating. Lives alone, no family to speak of, total net worth approximately $12,000 including her car. Each fact landed like a physical blow. June felt herself shrinking, becoming small and insignificant under Madison's assault. Grew up poor scholarship kid, always the smart girl who never quite fit in. Tell me, June, what's it like being someone's charity case again? That's enough. Sterling's voice cracked like a whip, but Madison ignored him. He does this, you know. Collects broken things. Emma was broken too. Cancer, daddy issues, desperate for someone to save her. Sound familiar? June felt something shatter inside her chest. Every insecurity, every fear she'd carried about not being enough, came flooding back. She looked at Sterling, searching his face for denial, for reassurance. What she found was guilt. June, he started, but she was already backing toward the door. Is that what this is? Her voice was barely a whisper. Am I just another broken thing for you to fix before you die? No, June, that's not. Your pattern seems to be damaged women who need saving. Madison continued relentlessly. How noble, how convenient, how utterly predictable. June felt the walls closing in, felt the familiar suffocation of being someone's project, someone's good deed. I need air. She fled toward the door, but Madison's voice followed her like poison. Run along, little librarian. This is a conversation for adults. Sterling's control finally snapped. In 2 strides, he was in Madison's face, his gray eyes blazing with fury. Get out. Now. Or what? You'll die at me? Face it, Sterling. I'm the only real thing in your life. I'm the only one who knew you before you became St. Sterling, patron of lost causes. I said get out. Madison gathered her purse with deliberate slowness, her mission clearly accomplished. The board meeting is at 9 a.m. sharp. Don't make me drag you back to New York in handcuffs. She paused at the door, looking back with satisfaction. Oh, and Sterling? Your little girlfriend might want to know that you've been having your assistant send anonymous donations to her library for months. Even your charity has an agenda. The door closed behind her with a soft click that sounded like a death sentence. Sterling stood alone in the suddenly too quiet cabin, his heart hammering against his ribs with dangerous irregularity. Through the window, he could see June standing by the lake, her shoulders shaking with what might have been tears or rage or both. He reached for his medication with trembling hands and realized that for the first time since his diagnosis, he was more afraid of living than dying. Outside, June stared at the water and wondered how many times one heart could break before it stopped working altogether. June didn't come back to the cabin until after midnight. Sterling had waited on the porch for hours, watching the path through the woods until darkness swallowed it whole. His heart had given him 2 irregular episodes, and he'd taken 3 pills more than prescribed, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the look in June's eyes when Madison had called her a charity case. When June finally appeared, she looked like she'd been crying for hours. Her red hair was tangled with leaves, her sweater torn from hiking through underbrush in the dark, but her spine was straight, her chin lifted in a way that made Sterling's chest ache with pride and terror in equal measure. I called the library, she said without preamble, not looking at him. Margaret told me about the donations. Anonymous benefactor, always just enough to cover whatever we needed most. Roof repairs, new computers, children's programs. Her voice was steady, but Sterling heard the hurt underneath. How long have you been watching me? June. How long? Sterling felt his world tilting. 18 months. Since Emma died. I was driving past Burlington after her funeral, saw you reading to kids in the library garden. You were wearing this yellow dress, and you were crying while you read Where the Wild Things Are, but you kept going because they needed the story to end. June closed her eyes, and Sterling saw her fighting for control. I donated because watching you love those kids was the first thing that made me feel human after Emma died. Not because you needed saving, because you were already saving everyone else. But Madison was right, wasn't she? June opened her eyes, and Sterling saw his own reflection in them. Broken, desperate, guilty. Emma was damaged. I'm damaged. You have a type. Yes, Sterling said quietly, and watched her flinch. I'm drawn to people who've been hurt. You want to know why? June waited, her heart hammering against her ribs. Because I'm damaged too. Because perfect people don't need me. And I've never figured out how to matter to someone who has their shit together. His voice cracked. But you're not a project, June. You're not charity. You're the strongest person I've ever met. I don't feel strong. You left a man who took you for granted. You drove 3 hours alone to heal your heart. You let a dying stranger into your life even though it terrified you. Sterling stood slowly, his hands shaking. You want to know what's different about you and Emma? June nodded, not trusting her voice. Emma needed me to live. You make me want to live. The words hung between them like a bridge across an impossible chasm. June felt tears threatening again, but this time they were different. Not tears of hurt, but of recognition. The board meeting, she said finally. I'm not going. Sterling. I'm done, June. Done with Madison's games, done with an empire built on other people's desperation for luxury. I want to spend whatever time I have left building something that matters. And if I ask you to fight, not just for the company, but for yourself, for us, Sterling felt his heart stutter, not from his condition, but from hope. What are you saying? June stepped closer, close enough that he could smell her shampoo, see the freckles scattered across her nose like constellations. I'm saying Madison was wrong about one thing. I'm not broken. I'm healing. And maybe we could heal each other. June. I'm also saying that if you think I'm going to let you die without a fight, you don't know me at all. Her voice was fierce, strong, everything Sterling had fallen in love with. Get on the transplant list. I can't. Yes, you can. We can do this together. All of it. The waiting, the hoping, the disappointment. I'm not Emma, Sterling. I'm not going anywhere. Sterling reached for her with trembling hands, framing her face like she was something precious and fragile. What if the transplant doesn't come in time? What if I die anyway? Then we'll have lived. Really lived. Together. June covered his hands with hers. But what if you don't die? What if we get 50 years instead of 50 weeks? Are you really going to throw that away because you're scared? Looking into her eyes, Sterling saw his answer. Not in her words, but in the way she was looking at him. Not like a dying man, not like a charity case, but like someone worth fighting for. Okay, he whispered. Okay? The transplant list, the board meeting, all of it. Sterling pulled her closer, until they were breathing the same air. But I have one condition. What? Marry me. June's laugh was startled, joyful, completely unexpected. Sterling Vaughn, are you proposing to me in the middle of the woods after the worst fight of our relationship? I'm proposing to you because this is the moment I realized I want to fight for our future, instead of hiding from it. His smile was soft, real, full of the kind of hope that terrified and thrilled her. Besides, we still have 16 days left on our bet. What bet? June asked, standing on her tiptoes to close the distance between them. The one where I make you fall in love with me. Sterling? Yeah? You already won. They kissed under the Vermont stars, tasting tears and promises and the kind of love that doesn't count time in years but in heartbeats. Behind them the cabin glowed warm and golden, and ahead of them stretched a future that was uncertain, terrifying, and absolutely worth fighting for. 6 months later, Sterling would receive the call about a matching heart. 9 months later, he'd walk June down the aisle of Burlington's oldest church, their hands linked and his heart beating strong and steady in his chest. But tonight, they had the mountains, the stars, and each other. Tonight, that was everything. 5 years later, the October afternoon sun streamed through the windows of the Callahan-Vaughan Community Library, casting golden squares across the reading circle where June sat with a group of wide-eyed 5-year-olds. Her wedding ring caught the light as she turned the page of Where the Wild Things Are, her voice steady and warm as she brought Max's adventure to life. And it was still hot, she read, smiling at the children's rapt faces. In the back of the room, Sterling leaned against the doorframe, his hand unconsciously resting over his chest where a stranger's heart beat strong and sure. 2 years post-transplant, and he still marveled at the steady rhythm, the absence of flutter and skip that had marked his dying days. Their daughter Emma, named for the woman who had taught him how to love, cherished by the woman who had taught him how to live, sat in his arms, her auburn curls catching the same light as her mother's hair. At 18 months, she already showed signs of June's fierce independence and Sterling's stubborn determination. Mama's working, Emma whispered, as if sharing a profound secret. Yes, she is, Sterling whispered back, watching his wife close the book and answer the inevitable chorus of, read it again, with patient grace. The library bore little resemblance to the struggling institution June had worked at 5 years ago. Sterling's foundation had transformed it into a thriving community center, not just with money, but with programs that brought families together. The children's wing buzzed with activity, the teen center hummed with quiet study sessions, and the small cafe run by Harper served the best coffee in 3 counties. But the real magic was June herself. As head librarian and community outreach coordinator, she had turned the library into the heart of Burlington, a place where stories lived and grew and changed lives. Mr. Sterling, a small voice piped up from the reading circle. Emma's trying to eat my bookmark. Sterling grinned and stepped forward to retrieve his daughter, who had indeed managed to grab a laminated bookmark shaped like a dragon and was examining it with scientific interest. Sorry about that, he said, settling into the circle as June gathered the scattered picture books. She's going through an everything goes in the mouth phase, just like her daddy used to put his foot in his mouth, June teased, earning giggles from the children who had heard this particular family joke before. As the children dispersed to find new books, June moved to Sterling's side, automatically taking Emma when she reached for her mama. The 3 of them made a picture of contentment that would have seemed impossible 5 years ago. A dying billionaire, a heartbroken librarian, and the future they'd been brave enough to build together. "Good day?" Sterling asked, sliding an arm around his wife's waist. "The Hendersons are moving to Florida, so we're losing our best volunteer reading tutors. The heating system is making that noise again, and I think Emma may have inherited your taste for expensive things." She tried to eat Mrs. Chen's diamond earring during story time. "That's my girl," Sterling said proudly, then grew serious. "And the letter from Harvard?" June's hand found his, fingers intertwining in a gesture as natural as breathing. "I turned it down." Sterling stopped walking. "June, before you say anything, it wasn't because of you or Emma or some misguided sense of obligation." June turned to face him, her green eyes bright with certainty. "It was because this is where I belong. Here, with our family, with our community. I don't need Harvard to validate what I already know about myself." Sterling lifted their joined hands and kissed her knuckles. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." June smiled, the same radiant expression that had first made his dying heart skip a beat. "Besides, someone has to keep you from buying the entire state of Vermont in fits of philanthropic enthusiasm. I only bought 3 buildings last month. 3 buildings you didn't need for programs that already had funding. But the community center needed a bigger kitchen for Harper's expansion, and the after-school program was cramped and—" June silenced him with a kiss that tasted like forever and felt like home. When they broke apart, Emma was clapping her tiny hands in delight. "Mama, Daddy." "That's right, baby girl," June murmured, settling their daughter more comfortably in her arms. "Mama and Daddy." They walked home through the quiet streets of Burlington, past the cafe where they'd had their first real conversation, past the park where Sterling had proposed for the second time, properly, with a ring and everything, past the small white church where they'd promised to love each other through sickness and health, for whatever time they were given. The October air was crisp with the promise of winter, and the maples lining their street blazed with the same gold and crimson that had witnessed their first tentative steps toward love. Emma babbled happily in June's arms, reaching for falling leaves with the determined focus of someone who believed the whole world existed for her entertainment. "Do you ever miss it?" June asked suddenly. "The empire, the power, the excitement of Manhattan?" Sterling considered the question as they turned into their driveway. Not the sprawling estate he could have afforded, but a modest Victorian with a wraparound porch and a garden where June grew vegetables and Emma learned to walk. Through the lit windows he could see the life they'd built. Books scattered on every surface, Emma's toys creating cheerful chaos. The dinner Harper had dropped off cooling on the kitchen counter. "I miss the certainty," he said finally. "When I was dying, I knew exactly what each day would bring. Meetings, deals, the slow countdown to nothing. This is messier." June's step faltered slightly. "But—" Sterling stopped and pulled her close, his family safe in the circle of his arms. "But messy means alive. Messy means we get to write our own story instead of just waiting for it to end." Above them, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. The same stars that had witnessed their first kiss, their first fight, their first choice to stay and build something beautiful from the broken pieces of their separate lives. "I love our messy story," June whispered against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his borrowed heart. "Even the parts where I was insufferably rich and arrogant. Especially those parts. They make the rest more interesting." Sterling laughed, and the sound echoed off the quiet street like a promise that some stories don't end. They just keep getting better. Inside their house, the answering machine blinked with messages from Harper about the cafe's expansion, from Ben about the Historical Society's new exhibit, from Sterling's assistant about foundation business that could wait until tomorrow. The ordinary, extraordinary business of a life lived fully and shared completely. But tonight they had dinner to share, a baby to bathe, and pages to read before sleep. Tonight they had each other and the infinite possibility of all the tomorrows they'd been brave enough to fight for. Outside, October wind scattered leaves like confetti for a celebration that would last a lifetime. What would you do? Imagine you discovered that the person you love has only 18 months to live, but refuses to get the heart transplant that could save them because they're afraid of going through the same pain their deceased spouse went through. Would you try to convince them to fight for their life, even knowing it could mean months or years of hope followed by possible heartbreak? Or would you respect their decision and just enjoy the time you have left together, without pressuring them into treatments that might not work? Think about it. June chose to fight and demanded Sterling get on the transplant list. Sterling wanted to just live what time was left, without false hope. In the end, her love convinced him to try. Now it's your turn. Team June. True love means fighting until the end, even when it's scary. vs Team Sterling. Sometimes loving someone means accepting their choices, even when we disagree. Your participation in the channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments.